Anyways, I'm doing this tutorial. I've done this a couple times. I tutor people who say they want to get into animation, but a variety of different things are holding them back. It's like I don't have the right software, I don't know how to draw, I don't have a drawing tablet, I this, I that, can't do anything. So the purpose of this tutorial is to show you that if you have a computer and a mouse, you can learn how to animate. The program I'm using is called FireAlpaca. I'll have a link to it in the description. It's completely free and is relatively user-friendly, and you can animate in it using only a mouse. So if all you have is a mouse, that's fine. You don't need any special equipment, you don't need special software. You can animate, and you can export your animation as a GIF and share it with people online. It doesn't have to be anything complex. So I'm going to start out by sharing the basic principles of animation and walking you through how to animate in FireAlpaca. So we're just going to do a very simple ball bounce. Okay, so the first thing you obviously want to do is go to the FireAlpaca site and download the latest version of FireAlpaca. The great thing about FireAlpaca is it's very light on resources and it's actually very stable. I've used FireAlpaca to animate professional videos and had it crash less than Adobe Animate. It obviously starts to chug a lot if you're doing a lot with it because it's really not intended for this, but even so, it handles a lot of different things very well. This is going to be a pretty reliable software for doing test animations. If you're at the point where all you want to do is learn, this is the perfect program and this is the perfect way to do it. Alright, so when you get to FireAlpaca the first time, you want to go to File, you want to go to Shortcut Settings. Whenever you want to add a new frame, you have to add it as a new layer. And usually you don't worry about this when you're just drawing. You don't necessarily need the hotkey. You're not going to be making a lot of new layers every second. But when you're animating, you are going to want to make a lot of new layers. So you're going to want to change the shortcut for adding a new layer and for duplicating your new layer to something that will be easy for you to remember. I use F7 and F6 because that's what it is in Flash and Animate. So that was easier for me to remember. So I already have these set. But here's, if you want to change it, you click on this, you highlight it to select it, and hit edit, enter your shortcut key, and F7, and then this key exists already, layer add. If you want to change your shortcut key to something that already exists, it'll show you down here, oh, here's what you're replacing, and then say, okay, overwrite. Well, this is what I clicked on, layer add, layer add. There you go. And then duplicate is down here. We are going to be using add folder, but we're not going to be using it extensively. There's no real need to add a shortcut for it. And I'll show you later on why adding a folder will be necessary. Okay, so you've done that, and you want to go to View. Now, onion skin mode, I put that as Control period, although I never use that hotkey. But the more important ones are going to be autoplay, select next frame, select previous frame. I set select next and previous frame as the period key and the comma key, and that's easy to remember because it's nice and close down to where your trackpad will be, and your copy and paste and all your most important ones are down here on that bottom row of the keyboard. The period and the comma key are also the greater than and less than signs, so those are handy looking little arrows. It's easy to remember those. Now, let's get into the actual meat and potatoes of the animation. Now, your first animation frame, you're going to want to do a folder. You want to go down here, click this little folder, add a new folder, and put your layer in here. You can't, of course, you don't need to have this folder, but this makes it useful if you want to have a background and you want to add that background in later. And so we got our ball bounce. So let's say we have animation looks like this. And then you, okay. Okay. I'm going to show you guys more about how I did that there. And when you are ready to start animating, you're going to want to go into onion skin mode. So you go to view, click view, you go down to where it says onion skin mode. You can always change the hotkey for that too. And then you can see your previous and your next frames. And that's more or less what the ball bounce looks like. You know, I hold down the key sometimes, and there you go, you kind of get what that looks, and here's what the autoplay looks like. We're going to go through this a little bit more and explain the timing and squash and stretch and that, but this is just what I want you guys to see for now. So we have this, but then say I want a background in this animation, whatever. So this is my background. When you're done transforming, you press enter, or you can push OK here, and that works. But if I press enter now, after I'm done transforming, because I set enter to that hotkey, it will bring up the autoplay instead of. Okay, so let me go back to view. So autoplay is because the colon key is pretty close to the enter key. I just use the colon key as autoplay. Okay. So here's this. Now I want to use this as a background, but now it's on each and different frame. So now this background down there is just counting as frame 1, and then just go straight to here. And so when I autoplay my animation, it looks like this. So it's playing the background, then it's playing my thing. But I could just go through and copy and paste the background and merge it every single time like this. So I would go here, merge, 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 merge. If you're familiar with how these types of programs work, you'll know how that works. But basically when you merge, it takes the layer and combines it with the layer below it. It's very useful when you're editing and drawing and doing digital paintings, but it's not so useful for the animation bit. And here's what that would look like now with the autoplay. Maybe I should make this a little bigger. Here's what it would look like now. And as you can see, this says 10.6 frames per second cached. But I have this drop down menu select this up 12 frames per second. That's because this is not trying to be so resource intensive. So when you actually export your animation, it's going to look a little bit faster than this. So if you do this, if you make the box a little smaller, sometimes it'll help your animation run better. Or if you up it to 24 seconds, 24 frames per second, it'll play at a larger frame rate. They should really let you tweak that. But if it looks all right at 12 frames per second, then it's probably going to be fine when you go to export it. But here we are at 8 frames per second, and it's damn near perfect. This because, again, this is a Japanese program, and it's more geared towards people who draw animate. Anyway, still usually, if you know what you're doing, you can still get something to look pretty good. If it looks all right at 10 or almost 11, you can be sure that it will look good at 12. Anyways, back to backgrounds. So my background's here on every single frame. Now let's say, oh shoot, I just merged all these, but now my background, I wanted to frame my background just a little bit differently. But so then you can't unmerge these. You'd have to redo all this animation and then merge it again. So that's why we have the layers, the animation layers in the folders. Okay. So now, so instead of dragging it into the viewport here, you can drag it over here underneath your folder, and then it will import it as a layer. Okay. So here's this. I'm going to transform this again. All right. And now I can draw my ball. There we go. So now, if I need to make any transformations to my background, I can do that and just. Oh, what if I just want to do that? Boom. And now my animations are but in this layer is completely untouched. So let's draw another circle. So what you want to do is before you even begin animating. So this is the layer I'm going to be animating on, and here's my next frame. I always want to have one of these folders that has nothing in except for the background. That way, that background will be in there, and I can keep on duplicating this layer and duplicating like that to give myself more blank frames. And then if I were to draw my ball here, then duplicate that every time, well, what if I don't want this ball to be exactly like that? Well, then I'm in trouble because now I have to delete this layer. It's fine. It takes 2 seconds to do. But if you have to do that for every single frame you draw, it's going to get really tedious really fast. Okay, so those are just all the basic things. More will come up as we go along, but that's basically it. You want to just basically get in the habit of putting all your animation into a layer folder, and you want to have your hotkeys set up. And I think I already said this, but we really want to start animating now. Okay, so first thing you guys are going to do is go over here to this little filled in square. That is your ellipse and rectangle tool. Go to this drop down menu, make sure you're focused on ellipse. You can turn your anti-aliasing on and off. That will give you more clarity depending on your resolution. You want it to constrain proportions. That will keep things, that means it's going to be as big width-wise as it is height-wise. So that way you know it's going to be a perfect circle. And I like to be able to select from center. I think that's a little bit easier when you're drawing a circle. Okay, so we have a ball. If you've followed the instructions correctly, you should have a ball now. But if you do have the ability to draw your animations, you want to start that now, because you'd be surprised how hard it is to draw even just a circle and to keep that circle on model as you're animating through. So the first thing you want to do when you're animating, when you're first starting out, and even when you're planning out something more complex, you want to plan out your animation by drawing a diagram. So turn this layer off for a second. So you've got your brush tool selected. You hold shift, and then you can draw a line. I want to take the width of this line down so that it's not taking up a lot of room. So there's that. We want to have a ground plane set in so that we know where the ground is, so that when the ball touches the ground, we can keep it consistent. This is more important when you're doing walk cycles, because let's say if you have 1 foot touch down on the ground plane, but you didn't keep track of what your ground plane was, and then the second foot touches down and it's a little bit above the ground plane, it'll look like the first foot is sinking into the ground. It will look weird. People will realize that, and you'll realize that when you play back your animation. You'll be like, what's wrong with that? Okay, so I have my red. The funky thing about this is that it picks up where you left off every single time, so you can't just like, oh, I'm going to draw a line from here to here. No, it's always going to draw a line to here from wherever you last did it. So to make things maybe a little bit easier on yourself, you can select this grid tool up here, and that means you can only draw on a straight line. You can use your mouse for this, but FireAlpaca is weird. If you have a tablet connected, it sometimes doesn't recognize your mouse with the brush tool. I don't know why that is, but it wants you to use your brush. Now I'm going to start going in like this. I'm going to select my red back again. You have your pen tool selected, and you're just going to plan this out. So here's your top frame, and here's your bottom frame. The red notches means, okay, well, it's only going to be at the top here, and it's going to be at the bottom here. whenever you're doing an animation, you want to learn to ease in. This isn't going to be going consistently the same speed down. When you drop a ball, it accelerates. And that will give your animation more liveliness. So you want to time it out something like this. And then it hits the ground here. Now I put a line down here. But this line should always be at where the center of your ball is. When the ball is touching the ground here, the center is not going to be all the way down to the ground. The center is probably going to be somewhere here. And then you'll go down a little bit. And then it'll come back up. And I'm going to use a different color for when it comes back up. I'm going to use purple. So when it comes back up, it's going to be more or less here. And then it's going to go, and then it's going to slow down again when it gets into the top. Now, I did say that you're going to ease in, ease out. But when you jump up off the ground, so you have your ball, so your ball's here, and your ball touches down on the ground, and then it springs back up into the air. It doesn't ease back. It doesn't ease back up into the air because you'll lose a lot of speed. Try it out yourself. You bounce a ball, it just seems to snap right back up almost instantly. There's no easing in that kind of motion. Okay, so we have our diagram here. And I'm going to just set this here, or here. It jumped out of my folder for a second. Okay, so here's this. Here's our ball. Make sure the center of your ball is on the center. How do you do that? I'm just going to make it a little bit transparent so I can see underneath it. So you see this opacity meter here. You just set it to 86. Then you can see your diagram underneath. This is roughly in the middle. It does not have to be exact to this diagram. This is a guideline. It's more important for you to see this. Okay, well, I have this diagram here, but I know in my head that something just doesn't look quite right, so I need to change the spacing a little bit. So anyways, you've drawn your diagram, you have your ball. Normally for an animation like a ball bounce, I wouldn't need to draw a diagram, but it's so helpful for planning out different actions to have a diagram. A lot of times you'll have an animation that's complex, and if you're having difficulties, think about, okay, well, where should my hands be? Where should my head be? Where should my body be? Where should the hips be? If you don't have a plan set out, you may have the artistic talent and the anatomical knowledge to know where all these things should be, but a lot of that stuff gets lost once you actually start getting down to animation. So you're animating and you're losing the hands, you're losing where everything should be. I have a bunch of different animations where I've tracked each individual body part on its own diagram and breaking up the diagram, deleting the diagram, and creating a new one every 5 or 6 frames so I can see, okay, well, here's why I wanted the hand to be here, and this other hand, it was going to be here. Familiarizing yourself with this technique is going to make it easier for you to plan out later things. So we have this ball, and we could keep drawing the ball every single time, and if you were animating this traditionally on pen and paper, you would. But we're going to be duplicating this whole folder, so that way we always know we're dealing with the same mass of the ball. This ball is exactly the same size as the ball before it, so that we don't have to worry about losing that information and having things go off model. So, the next thing we want to do is, since this is going to be a looping animation, we want the last frame to be identical to the first frame. So this is going to be first, or frame 1, and this is going to be our last frame. Boom. So you keep that last frame. So we're not going to touch this one because we want this one to look exactly like the first frame. Now we can duplicate this first one again and rename it to frame 2. Or what we want to do is actually our squash frame. Keyframes are frames in your animation that inform what the energy of your shot is. Most important frames that you need are your frames where it's in the air, the frame where it's touching the ground, and the frame immediately after that where it's coming back up. So, we want this to move straight down. We're not going to be dealing with any other heavier principles of animation just yet. We can move this straight down by selecting V, or pushing V to use this this transformation tool here, the move tool. And you hold down Shift, and then you click this and click the layer. Make sure you're selected on the ball layer. In fact, you should put this as ball. Name your layers. That'll make everything go a lot easier so you know what you're selecting. So I'm selecting ball. Now, it's a little bit tricky here because when your ball touches the ground, it needs to squash a little. Everything that you animate is squashing and stretching at least a little bit. Even a bowling ball squashes just a little tiny bit. If you go online, you look up video of a golf ball being hit by a 9-iron at 10,000 frames per second, it squishes ever so slightly. And in the business of animation, we're gonna exaggerate that. So this, when it touches the ground, it's gonna squash a little bit. Now, squashing doesn't just mean squeezing it this one way, because if we did it that way, let's say, okay, so that's our animation. It didn't squash. Look, it just got smaller. Let me turn off these, the guide frames for now. Turn that to that. It just got small. Now I can illustrate this a little bit better if I do this. So I might make sure I always need to be selected on my frame too. Mine too. So yeah, I'm following my guide here. Oh, how'd that happen? Oop. I selected the folder by accident and moved the whole folder down. Just be careful when you do that. So you move it, I nudged it a little bit down, duplicate, down. I just did the same thing again, didn't I? Oop. And I don't want that much. And then duplicate this again, and then move it down like that. So I'm going to play that animation back. If you play it, let's duplicate the squash frame so you can pause it a little more. It's just kind of, look, it shrunk. It didn't really squash out. So you transform it both ways. Delete all those squash frames for now. Okay, so you're gonna have to do that and make it a little bit wider. You don't want it to look like, you want it to look like it's taking up the same amount of space. So if this one fits into that, let's say it's a 1x1 or a 2x2 rectangle that fits into, you'd want this to fit into like a 1x4 rectangle. If you get what I'm saying. That's the same volume. The 2x2 and the 1x4 have the same volume, but they're a different shape. So that way you're like, okay, yes, it bounced. It didn't just change size. And when you're transforming it, make sure you have this layer on here. When you're transforming it, you want to make sure that while you're squashing and stretching it, that it's still making contact with the ground. Because if it's lost, if I were to just like squash it like this, oh look, now it's not touching the ground anymore. That's no good. So here's the ground. You can kind of eyeball it and make sure that it looks right. I mean, if it's not exactly perfect, most people aren't going to notice. But if you're only transforming it in one direction, people will definitely notice that. Okay, so here's this. Now towards the end of its descent here, it is going to stretch out a little bit like this. So you got that. So it looks more like that. But what you want to do when it comes back up is you want it to look just like this ball again, because that will show that it's got a little bit of springiness to it, that it quickly snaps back into shape when it's coming back up. That will give your animation more of a bouncy ball quality, like one of those bouncy balls you get out of a coin machine. So we want to look exactly like this, so I'm going to duplicate my last frame that way because I still have that ball that looks just like it. And I'm going to be following my guide again and having it come off the ground. And duplicating this again. Do that. Duplicate. Come on. Do that. And duplicate one more time. And there you go. Now it comes back up to the top. And let's see what it looks like now. Again, you can always page through using the greater than and less than keys. Look at that. See, now watch it. So this is, I'm going to play it forwards. You have to turn off. The unfortunate thing about this is that each animation, all the animation is on one layer, is on one timeline. Or so on other animation programs, you'd be able to go ahead and mute an entire animation timeline and have both of them playing simultaneously. Whereas in this, I have to go into each individual frame and turn off the guide layer. Okay, but now I have everything set up. Now let's see what it looks like. Wow, frame rate's horrible. But look at it, it kind of like stops for a split second up in the air there. Just kind of stops there because it's playing this frame and this frame together. So it just kind of has an unnatural stop. A lot of times you'll be, if you see a GIF online and it looks like that a GIF does a weird snapping or a strange, weird like slight pause right as the GIF is starting to loop up again, it's because the last frame and the first frame are the exact same frame. This happens a lot. I even see this happen in video games where the video game sprites, first frame and the last frame are the same frame. So it's playing through like this, and then it just stops there. It's like, it's grating to see. So when you're ready to export your animation, you want to delete this frame. You're only using this frame as a guide to this. Now let's go ahead and name all these layers too. This is because we have them how we want them. But if we notice we want to change anything, then it's going to be annoying to have to go and aggravate and be like, okay, well, which of these folders named last frame is it? So you double click on the layer and rename it to whichever it is sequentially. So you got 1, 2, 3, 4, now 5. 6, 7, and then your last frame. So this is a 7-frame animation. Is pretty easy. Boom. Delete your last frame. Now let's see what it looks like. You're going to see that look a lot better when you actually get it to come out. Boop. Squash happens so slightly, you barely even see it. I might. Sometimes if your squash and stretch is too drastic, it can be a bit jarring. It looks like almost like it disappeared for a second there. Or you might want to put more. There's a temptation to put more than one squash frame, but if you do that, it definitely starts to look a bit off. I only really have one frame here where the ball is actually touching the ground, so it's usually better to have your stretch frame. This is touching the frame. It's just about to touch the ground here, let's say. And we can duplicate this layer and give this ball a little bit more time to actually come in to this action. So let's put this let's rename this layer 3.5. And we have the ball coming down a little bit faster here, and then its peak acceleration all the way down here. So that way these two are a little bit closer together, so it doesn't look like it magically transported from up here down here. Let's see how that looks. Again, it does look like it could be a bit too drastic of a squash and stretch. So let's just move this guy a little bit up. Again, you're holding shift to move it straight up and down. And then you do this, using my other frame to compare, taking that in a little bit. And those look roughly okay. And take this squashed ball and stretch it back out a little bit. Again, every single time you move this, it's going to move your ground plane. So you have this. Have your ground plane there open as a guide, so that way it's still touching the ground. Yes, even though this is the only one frame where it's touching the ground, you do want to make sure that you're utilizing your guide and you're making sure that you're keeping your ground plane consistent. Even if it's on something like this, because you need to stay in the habit of it. Okay, so everything's looking a little bit better now. I'm going to have this guy pop up a little bit more. And same thing with this guy too. So let's see how we look now. I think that's looking a lot better. And for some reason it looks better in the smaller mode. Anyway, so that's a ball bounce for you. This is a very simple kind of animation, but you can do this totally within FireAlpaca. Now let me show you something I did that's pretty neat. There we go. So I drew this ball. I just drew a ball bounce, and then I connected the ball bounce to, I had a ground plane layer, and I timed these, I timed the one leg out, I timed the other leg out. Actually, they're both the same leg, just copied and pasted onto opposite sides of the frame. And then I put this little ball hat on. Let's see, there's a couple errors I made where this ball pops out over his head. But for the most part, this animation looks pretty good, and you can do simple animations like this totally with your mouse, utilizing these simple principles. And the more you get used to them, you'll be able to carry these principles over into other programs because you have the fundamentals down. If you're young or if you have a tight budget but you want to start animating, you can just start it now. It'll be in at least this way you can start building those principles, and you can actually see if it's something you're into. You might find that you don't enjoy animation as much as you thought you might, and it's good to find out now before you spend $500 on a Huion tablet and $300 on Adobe Creative Cloud. So, and animation in FireAlpaca, it's not meant for animation, but you can do it. I'll have a link to a video below. I drew all the frames in FireAlpaca, and I composited them in After Effects. And I'll show you the techniques of how you would go about doing that. Thank you for watching, and please leave something in the comments for if you have any questions. I'll be more than happy to answer them. If you have any other, is there anything in particular you would want to learn about animation, if there's any particular style you guys want to emulate and you'd like help on that, I'll be more than happy to oblige you. So again, thank you for watching and have a great one.